you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. Thanks for being here today. I am going to do another kind of freewheeling podcast that's just sort of on a random topic related to video games while I'm waiting for my wife Reagan to return. She should be back next week for our next podcast, which is the plan right now, I think, is for it to be about Andor season one. So we're going to take a continued hiatus on Game of Thrones and go to Andor, just because Andor season two is obviously a lot newer and we were really impressed by that show. Of course, we got to start with the beginning, and so we are going to be analyzing season one of Andor. I have gone through and put together notes on most of that episode, but there are a couple episodes left because those seasons are fairly long that I still have to sort of line up for me. But anyway, that's going to be next week. This week, what I thought I would do is kind of copy, in a sense, this discussion that I saw but with Mystic Ryan is my favorite PlayStation YouTuber, and he was a guest on Scott the Waz's kind of secondary channel that he seems to have going right now. Scott Stash, I believe it's called, and they had a discussion that kind of was trying to create the what would be the lineup, the 20 game lineup for the PlayStation 2 Classic, if such a thing, such a device emerged. Now, of course, the caveat there is that such a device is extremely unlikely to emerge because the PlayStation 1 Classic was such a flop, and that was for a number of reasons. I was writing about that way back whenever it was announced on my website, thesoundtrackonline.com. You can go back and kind of get some of my thoughts of what I would have liked to put into the PS1 Classic at that time on the website. Although I think it might be kind of interesting to update that and do an episode of that on the podcast potentially, just because I grew up with the PlayStation 1. That was my first big home console. And a lot of my thoughts have evolved a lot since I wrote that on the Soundtrack Online side. I think that was back in 2018 when I wrote that. So definitely out of date. But obviously, there is no PS2 Classic, and there is no baseline for a PS2 Classic like there is for the PS1 Classic. And then the PS2, we kind of talked about it last week on my Switch episode, but the PS2 is definitely the console that I spent the most time with over the course of my life. I mean, you could argue that, something like the Game Boy Advance SP or the DS technically is taking that now, which is true, but the PS2 in terms of home consoles definitely was on top of that list and still is, and it's still by far the console I've finished the most games on and probably have the most playtime on overall. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of do a list putting together that it's not really a top 20 games for the PS2, but it is kind of a representative list of the 20 games that define the PS2. And I ended up deciding to make two separate lists here. I did a lineup that I think would make the most sense from just the perspective of kind of grabbing the most people as possible. It's really made up of heavy hitters, best sellers, and it's really specific to just like one game per franchise. And I try to do kind of like what Mystic and Scott the Woz did, where they kind of tried to make sure that all the major genres were represented. So that's what the first list I'm going to go through today is all about. But then I made a second list, and this one is essentially my own personal lineup of what if the PS2 Classic was designed with the one consumer in mind, and that consumer being me. Then this is what I would like to see, and this is not really even true necessarily either, because there's other PS2 games that I didn't get around to that I could make like a list of the top 20 PS2 games I haven't played that I would be most interested in. Technically, that would probably be the best thing to sell to me, the consumer. But I thought it'd be kind of more interesting and I actually did kind of consider that. But I think what I ended up landing on was just kind of basically putting together a list of my top 20 PS2 games. And there are a couple of honorable mentions, and it gets a little nebulous at the bottom, which I'm going to get into whenever I get into that second list. But yeah, here at the top, we'll get into this lineup that I've created for the masses, what I think would make the most sense if they wanted to capture the widest audience possible for 20 games in a potential PlayStation 2 classic. So, before we get into that, I just want to remind you that Controlled Burns is a weekly hobby list podcast with a particular focus on lists and topics related to video games, music, TV, and film, as well as other hobbies and aspects of pop culture. If you're interested in writing into the podcast and having your comments or questions read on air, you can. You can write into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. So, putting together a list of the top 20 PlayStation 2 games, or at least 20 games I think would make sense to put on the PlayStation 2 Classic. It's kind of an interesting exercise, and I think it makes the most sense to kind of just look at it in terms of the best-selling games on the PlayStation 2. And so I actually just Googled the list of the best-selling PS2 games, and I'm pulling it up again right now just because I didn't obviously just go down the line and just pick the literal top 20 best-selling games. There's like some Maddens in there, and there's obviously some repeats in terms of series. Grand Theft Auto obviously dominates, but I've only selected one Grand Theft Auto game for this list. Gran Turismo dominates, but I've only selected one Gran Turismo game on this list. So really, Final Fantasy dominates as well, and Kingdom Hearts. So I narrowed it down to one game per franchise, and I just kind of wanted to capture the widest base possible. So I'm gonna start from the bottom and go to the top. The bottom are kind of the ones that I would say are the most questionable picks. Like these are the ones that are the most debatable, and then when you get to the top, it's kind of the most slam dunk picks, I would say. So the number 20 that I arrived at is actually pretty far down the list of, well, it's number 55 according to the Wikipedia list of the best-selling PlayStation 2 games. And that game is Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening. This is a game that I did not play on the PS2, and I still have never played it to this day. I never have played any of the Devil May Cry games, so this is definitely not a pick for me. This is just a pick from just kind of trying to represent the PlayStation 2 and get like what was a pretty popular, really kind of the creation of the sort of stylish action hack and slash genre. So we obviously had hack and slashes before the PlayStation 2. They were particularly popular with like Diablo is kind of in that vein. I know it's technically called an ARPG, but it's pretty much a hack and slasher. And then you had your beat 'em ups, I guess, was kind of the original sort of starting point of that. When I remember I go back to the Genesis with like Golden Axe and stuff like that. I know you can take it back to the NES with some of those brawlers as well. But Golden Axe was obviously with weapons and kind of sort of feels like the beginning of what became the hack and slash genre, which is really kind of a rote genre, I guess you could say, during the Genesis era. Kind of that sprite based 16-bit era is like kind of a dime a dozen when it comes to those games. But the stylus action game was definitely required 3D, and it kind of required solid 3D graphics. Like they were always like pushing the boundaries of the graphics at the time. And Devil May Cry 1, which came out way back in 2001, was kind of the first one that I feel like really popularized that. And then there were others that came along after that that were clearly much more successful and famous, like God of War is definitely the biggest example. And you have more recent examples like the Bayonetta series. But Devil May Cry 3 is the one I picked here. There's a couple reasons for that. Devil May Cry 3 actually is the best selling of the Devil May Cry games on the PlayStation 2, so that was definitely probably the biggest reason that I picked it, and I think that's significant. But also, my understanding of Devil May Cry 3 is that it's actually a prequel, so it's more than possible to just start here. You don't necessarily need the background of Devil May Cry 1 and 2 to play this game. And so that was another thing that kind of factored into my decision to put this game on there. I definitely remember that was a pretty late PlayStation 2 game. It came out in 2005, and that was a game that was the year that I subscribed to Game Informer for the first time, and I definitely remember seeing a lot of advertising for Devil May Cry 3, and obviously they thought that game was really awesome. Might have even been reviewed in the first issue that I ever got, which was the March 2005 issue with condemned criminal origins on the cover. But yeah, that was a really well-selling game. It's a beloved franchise, and obviously a franchise that persists to this day. So yeah, I think Devil May Cry 3 makes sense for the number 20 spot. My number 19 is Star Wars Battlefront 2, which it was the also a 2005 release and was the sequel to the original Star Wars Battlefront. This game came out the year that Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, came out, and Star Wars Battlefront 2. I mean, if you were around at the time, if you were a Star Wars fan at the time, but even if you were just a general fan of video games and shooters at the time, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was pretty inescapable. It was a game that it's one of the ones I spent by far the most time with on the PlayStation 2. Might even be the game I spent the most time with on the PlayStation 2. Obviously, there's no way to really know that because they didn't keep track of how much time you spent in most of those games back in the day, but boy, I spent a ton of time on Star Wars Battlefront 2. I did start with the first one, and in some ways, I actually like the first one more. But Battlefront 2 was definitely the more popular of the two. It actually had a pretty sizable, from what I understand, online player base. Although I didn't, it wasn't a game that I was able to play online. I just didn't. We just didn't have that level of tech in my house at that time. Didn't have the setup to be able. It would have been amazing, and I really wish that I could have done that. And I tried to recreate that with the Battlefront Classic Collection they just finally put out last year, but it ended up being obviously a huge disappointment because of just the shoddy state that it was in whenever it was released. So I got a little glimpse of what that would have been like, but unfortunately, didn't really get to probably experience what it would have truly been like in its glory days. But yeah, Battlefront 2 is definitely an awesome game. It had really strong gameplay mechanics, but for for the time, but also just the way it captured the scale of Star Wars conflicts was really impressive at the time, and just super fun. And even though I wasn't able to play online, I did get to play with a lot of my friends in split screen, which I have a lot of fun memories with that. But honestly, most of the time that I was just playing by myself, and it was just one of those games that never really got old for me. It was so replayable. It had a campaign, which was fun, but it also had just all these other, well, just instant action was fun enough. You could just randomize maps and have a great time, and it still sounds fun as hell today, quite frankly. But then on top of that, it had the Galactic Conquest mode, which was like really great. It was like you picked an army, one of the four, between the the droids, the clones, the Empire, and the rebels, and then like you basically conquered the galaxy by like created a big map, and you had to like go around all the planets and capture them all. And meanwhile, your opponent was doing that. And I even had some times where I don't think I ever like, fully finished one, but I had some times where I would do that with a friend, and like we would be going at he'd be one side and I'd be the other. And if you had somebody that was really into the game, you could like really have some all out epic wars over the fate of the galaxy in that mode. So that was really awesome. In terms of like PlayStation 2 was not a big shooter console, unlike the Xbox, where that was really popularized. Obviously, didn't have anything anywhere near the level of Halo, but Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was a multi-platform game, don't get me wrong. It unlike Devil May Cry 3, which I think eventually came to Xbox as well, but I could be wrong about that. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 was definitely multi-platform, but still, just so many people played it on the PlayStation 2, and certainly I played a ton of it on the PlayStation 2, and I think that would be an awesome inclusion, especially since, I want to preface that on this list, I really wasn't paying any attention to like sort of the logistics of this thing or like how possible it actually would be. I didn't really factor. I mean, I factored it into a degree. I don't think I included Guitar Hero on this list because I was like, I mean, realistically, you're not going to be able to put a Guitar Hero. I just kind of wrote that off because there's just kind of no way that you're going to be able to do a Guitar Hero in a a classic box. That's just not coming back. But so I did sort of keep that level of realism in there. But in terms of just like getting the rights for these things and copyright and things of that nature, I didn't really worry too much about that. That's not really what we're here to do today. We're just kind of talking about what would make the most sense if that wasn't an issue. But I think Battlefront 2 that would probably be doable just because they brought back so many of the Star Wars Battlefront games on modern consoles, including obviously Battlefront 1 and 2. So yeah, that would be a really cool one to see. Number 18 is a game that I played a little but didn't really get into as much as some of my friends did, and that is Tony Hawk's Underground. And I know that this is a game that is definitely left off a lot of these lists because people say that it would be such a challenge to get the licensing for it, but I don't really understand that argument because I mean they're bringing back the Tony Hawk games left and right on modern consoles. We have Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 and now 3 and 4 coming. So I think my understanding, Underground is the one that came out after 4, so it's really not that big of a leap to expect that this game could come back as well. And it was a really awesome game at the time. Obviously, I think that in terms of just the widest spreading success and just in terms of the zeitgeist, I think Tony Hawk's Pro Skater probably 2 on the PlayStation 1 was kind of the peak of that. The one that I played the most on the PS1 was actually 3, but that was because it was rated E instead of teen, and my mom was extremely strict about what games I could play, and so I wasn't actually able to get Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, but I was able to get 3. But I did go over to other friends' houses and play some of those other ones. But Underground, I didn't ever own. I did play it because friends would bring it over. I think Eric Seals, one of my friends back in the day, was a big fan of Tony Hawk's Underground, if I remember correctly. It was kind of awesome because it definitely changed the way the game is played. Instead of just kind of being these score attack games, it actually, with a time limit. Underground actually kind of let you, it was kind of a little bit more open world, I think. It actually let you sort of run around and kind of a more open world setting. And that was pretty awesome. That's my recollection of it anyway. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't spend a ton of time with it, so I could I could have that mixed up with Underground 2. But I think that was kind of the general idea, was like sort of an opening of the envelope of what you could do in a Tony Hawk game, which obviously persisted with Underground 2, and then some of the ones that came out after that, your Section 8s, your American Wastelands, and things of that nature. But even though Tony Hawk wasn't quite as popular at this point as he was later, at the beginning of the kind of in that beginning of the Tony Hawk franchise on the PlayStation 1, he was still very popular. Skateboarding culture was still very big at this time, and it was a certainly a defining game for the PlayStation 2, so I think it makes sense to include it. Number 17 on this list is Lego Star Wars. This was, so I don't know if I mentioned, but just to wrap up, Devil May Cry 3 was the 55th best-selling game on PS2. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was number 53. Tony Hawk's Underground was number 51. Lego Star Wars was number 49. And so all of these games sold between 2.3 and 2.5 million copies. Lego Star Wars, which we're just kind of talking about the first one here, which was the best-selling as far as I understand. Which only covered the prequels, which was kind of interesting. But that game also came out in 2005. 2005 was just an amazing year for Star Wars games. It also, I think, was when Republic Commando came out, and certainly it was when Knights of the Old Republic 2 came out, and obviously I mentioned Star Wars Battlefront 2. But yes, also Lego Star Wars came out that year, and that was really exciting for me because, like I said, my mom was really strict. I couldn't actually play teen games until I was a teenager, and I didn't become a teenager until 2007. So I did go over to friends' houses and play them and stuff, but I did have some, like at my dad's house and stuff that I really wasn't supposed to have, like Star Wars Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2. But Lego Star Wars was really exciting for me at the time because there was obviously no way that was going to be rated teen, and it was really exciting to be able, because Star Wars was my favorite franchise at the time. It still kind of is. And so I was just really excited to be able to have a Star Wars game that wasn't Star Wars. What was it? It was Star Wars. Oh man, I forget what this. There was this one PS1 game that and they actually recently put it on the PS5 through the Classics program. But there was a Star Wars game on PS1. I think it was like Rebel Assault, Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire. That's what it was, and it was like this really terrible FMV video Star Wars game that it took an hour to beat if you knew what you were doing. And like it just had horrendous acting and not very good gameplay. And I played it as a kid because it was like, hey, it was a Star Wars game that I was allowed to have, but man, it was not very good. But Lego Star Wars was good, and it was obviously very successful. This was obviously there have been Lego games before this. I actually had some Lego games back on the PC back in the day. I remember playing a lot of Lego Land, Lego Chess. That was my favorite. I really loved that. There was like this Lego kind of puzzle game where you're like this spy guy that was kind of interesting. There were a couple others. There was like Lego Loco or something like that. There was quite a few, but I played a lot of those. I think they might have come in like cereal boxes or something. That was how I got my hands on those. But obviously, Lego Star Wars was on a whole nother level in terms of success and popularity because it used the Star Wars franchise. It was the first of that, and it's just something that has persisted all these years later. We obviously got the Skywalker saga this decade. So yeah, it's very interesting. And then also that was like when the prequels were, in all the zeitgeist. I think actually Lego Star Wars came out before the release of Episode 3, a couple months, I think, even maybe a month and a half before the release of Episode 3. And I think actually I did play through the Episode 3 levels and was kind of spoiled about what happens in that movie. Not to a great degree because there wasn't even any dialogue in Lego Star Wars back in the day, but um, yeah, I definitely played through Lego Star. I got it immediately because I was super excited about it. That was another thing that I read about in the first issue of Game Informer I ever got, and I was like, in terms of games I was most excited for. Another idea for a podcast that I have written down in terms of games that I was just like most excited for before they released. But Lego Star Wars would probably be on that list. I was pretty hyped for that. And it was also just really cool because you could play as so many different characters from the prequels, and there was this really cool thing that I wonder how many kids kind of had a similar experience to me, but the sort of hub for the game was Dexter's Diner from Lego Star Wars 2, which is a totally random idea. But you could like run around in there, and there was like a little bit of space outside where you could run around, and it was so awesome because there was just like a random collection of the characters that you had unlocked up to that point in the game, just wandering around, and they would actually get into fights with each other outside, and But then like everybody kind of had like this gentleman's agreement, like once you went inside, not to shoot at each other, even if you were at opposing sides. It was just such a cool like idea, just like a little random story generator that they had created with their AI, and it was just so smart, and it led to I've spent hours just messing around with that I thought was so fun, and like I remember you could unlock all this stuff. You could unlock like rare weapons were coffee cups, and I remember just like sitting in the booth and or well, just standing because you couldn't actually sit, but standing in the booths inside Dexter's Diner and having some coffee, like pretending like I was my grandfather who was this big coffee drinker. There's so many just like innocent memories like that playing Lego Star Wars that I have, and it's definitely another one of the PS2 games I spent the most time on, and I definitely 100%ed it back in the day, and just would be an awesome inclusion for the PlayStation 2 Classic, and as well as it's a really great multiplayer game that's really pick up and play as well. So I think it would kind of lend itself to it being very fun for people. Okay, number 16 on this list, I wrote down Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies. Now, this is something that I definitely did not play. This is the number, oh man, it's up there. It's number 40, the 41st best-selling PlayStation 2 game with 2.64 million copies sold. It was the most successful of the Ace Combat games. I think this also came, oh no, this is from 2001. Yeah, so this is an early PS2 game. And while I didn't play Ace Combat, this was a very kind of popular style of game at the time where you were just kind of like in the first person view and you were flying they were kind of like more arcade style flying games. You go back to the Nintendo 64, they had it with what was that series that they had, Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64. That was kind of an example of what the gameplay was like here. I remember I had this Top Gun game on the PlayStation 2 is one of the first PS2 games I had. I think maybe my dad bought it, but um it was kind of similar where obviously you're in the cockpit of a fighter and you were going around and flying and doing missions. And then the Star Wars Starfighter series, that's definitely the one that I spent the most time with on the PlayStation 2. But yeah, apparently Ace Combat 4 was the most successful of those, even beyond the Star Wars stuff, which is very interesting. And really don't know much about like the storytelling of it, if there is any, or the mission design. But this was a very popular franchise and definitely a pretty important franchise, I would say, for the PlayStation 2. Definitely kind of a little bit of a relic of that time period where that style of gameplay was very popular. You don't see that a whole lot today. It's something kind of similar in I think it was 2019 or maybe I guess it was 2020 when that Star Wars I think it was called Starfighters, but I could be wrong about that. But that PS4 uh, Star Wars game that came out, which I did play through and actually enjoyed quite a bit, but that was kind of like a revival of that, but I don't think it was like a huge success. So, yeah, this style of game is just not really very popular today. It's kind of like has fallen by the wayside, even more so than stuff like racing games, which have definitely fallen in terms of their influence compared to their zeitgeist kind of in this era. But these arcade style flight sims in particular have just really fallen out of favor. But definitely an important part of the PlayStation 2. I think that would be a cool one to include. Number 15 is another game that I really didn't play a lot of, and that is, or really any at all. And a lot of that's because I wouldn't have been allowed to at the time. But that is SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs. This was a pretty big franchise on the PlayStation 2. These were all published by Sony. And the most successful one apparently was the first one, which sold 2.78 million units, and it was the 39th best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. This was definitely big in terms of the early online days for the PlayStation 2. It was one of the first big games, maybe the first that allowed online play for the PS2. It included like a USB headset where you could talk to people, but also offline it kind of had like speech recognition where you could like give commands and stuff like that. And it also had like a campaign, an offline campaign that people could play too. It was a third person game instead of a first person. And I think it was a lot more focused on tactics, like you were sort of directing a group of soldiers or a small squad around these missions. And like I said, I haven't played this game before, but I do think it's cool. I have since gone back because you can get them for super cheap today. So I have gone back and actually picked up all three of the main SOCOM games on the PS2 just to kind of bolster my own PlayStation 2 collection in recent years, but haven't actually booted it up. I don't know, realistically, I don't know if I'm ever going to get around to SOCOM US Navy SEALs, but in terms of the PS2, it was a huge franchise. It was a Sony published franchise, and this is another style of game, like these kind of tactical. I guess like you could say some of the Tom Clancy stuff, your Rainbow Six Siege, maybe you could argue sort of comes out of that, but obviously it's a much more refined, and it's obviously first person, and there's definitely some major differences. But this was definitely kind of the beginning of that very, instead of being focused on the action like your Medal of Honors or your Call of Duties or your Halos, this is a lot more tactical and kind of slower pace. So definitely a big part of obviously just the wartime shooters of the time, and I think a good representative of a very successful version of that, and obviously one that was exclusive to the PlayStation 2. So I think it makes sense to include on the classic. Number 14, I have this is another one where it's like you might be kind of surprised by this, especially if you weren't alive at the time and you weren't kind of there. But number 14, I have SmackDown versus Raw 2006. This was a huge deal. Like the WWE was extremely popular at that time, but in particular, wrestling video games were very popular at the time. You can go back to like the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation 1; they were obviously very popular there, and I think maybe even more popular. I don't actually know how those sales compared with the SmackDown versus Raw series, but I can tell you that on the PlayStation 2, the SmackDown versus Raw series was absolutely huge, and it was exclusive to the PlayStation 2 for a long time. And there was several to pick from. My favorite was actually SmackDown versus Raw 2007, but 2006 was the first one that I guess the first one I played was like SmackDown, Just Bring It way back in 2001. But SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 was the most successful of the wrestling games on the PlayStation 2. It was exclusive to the PlayStation 2, except for it was also on the PSP, which actually that's where I spent the most time playing it. That's easily my most played game on the PSP. But it sold 2.9 million copies on the PlayStation 2 alone, and it was just an extremely popular game and very fun as well. There was actually a lot going on in this game. It was pretty impressive in terms of its scope. It had two different storylines that you could go through, and they with branching paths where you would make decisions, or the outcomes of certain matches would determine like what would happen in the story, which was really awesome at the time. And like if you were a fan, and especially a kid at the time, kind of the target audience of this game, like it was very easy to get wrapped up into that. It was like a little bit of a RPG style uh, experience that was really a lot of fun at the time. But then beyond that, what was like really awesome, it was a huge time sink, was the general manager mode, and this was the game that created the general manager mode, where you became either the general manager of Raw or SmackDown, and then you would compete against the other show. You had to put on better shows than your opponent, and like every single show over the course of the year would shift the fan base, and you had to outperform them, and like you had your pay-per-views, which were an opportunity to really like build up your fan base within your opponent would have a pay-per-view, and that would really cut into your fan base. So it was a really awesome mode. I spent countless hours playing that on the PSP back in the day, and then even in recent years I booted it back up, and I actually did a full year where I played every match, and just really spent a ton of time with that. It's still an extremely addictive mode, super fun. I understand that, or my understanding is that they have brought some version of this back in the more recent WWE games. I have not played those, but back in the day, I can tell you, man, SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 was huge. And the cover stars were Batista and John Cena. It was just perfect. Both of those guys were easily the most popular guys in the WWE at the time. Even though it says 2006, it actually came out in 2005. That was the year that I actually became a WWE fan. Particularly, I was a SmackDown fan overall, and so yeah, I was just like I was the perfect target audience for that game, and boy, did I eat that up! I loved it, and a lot of people obviously did too, because it's one of the best selling games on the PlayStation 2. It's the only sports game I included on here because like maybe it feels like a weird inclusion because obviously there are more annualized and more popular sports games like your Madden games and your NBAs that were on the PS2. Although I'm not 100% sure if there actually is any NBA. It might just be. So there's a Pro Evo Soccer that's above it. Obviously, there's several Madden games that are above it, but that's it. I mean, there like no NBA 2K or anything was above SmackDown versus Raw at this time. I'm very curious what the most successful NBA game was on the PlayStation 2. Apparently, oh yeah, so NFL 2K5, that was really popular game, but that was still like, oh, NBA Live 2005 was apparently the most successful NBA game on the PlayStation 2, followed by NBA Street. That was a big one, and NBA Street Volume 2. So this is like really before the 2K series really took off. You got to go down to number 145 for ESPN NBA 2K5 in terms of the best-selling NBA game. So very different landscape today in terms of the sports video game landscape than or back then than you see today, where WWE was truly more popular than the NBA series. It was more popular than the NHL series. It was more popular than basically everything except for Madden and apparently Pro Evolution Soccer, which I did not think that was more of a European thing. I don't think that was super big over here. But yeah, so Smackdown vs. Raw 2006, just an awesome game. If you go back and play it today, you would still have a really great time. I'm not sure if you could say that for the Madden games as well. So yeah, for all those reasons, I did include Smackdown vs. Raw 2006. I think it would be a super cool inclusion on the PlayStation 2 Classic. Number 13, I have Medal of Honor Frontline. So the Medal of Honor. Let's see, where is Medal of Honor? How many copies did Medal of Honor sell? Medal of Honor Frontline is the 24th best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 3.55 million copies. This is one of those games that I did play. I did not buy this game. I would not have been interested in this game at the time. I was not the target audience during my run on the PlayStation 2. But my dad bought Medal of Honor Frontline for himself, and he played it a little bit. But I actually got further than him in the game later on, whenever I got a little bit older. This was you're kind of your typical World War II first-person shooter, extremely popular at the time. This is, I think, before Call of Duty. I don't think Call of Duty existed at the point when this game released. It was released in 2002, so that's pretty early. Let's see when the first Call of Duty was released. The first Call of Duty was released in 2003, so this is pre Call of Duty. I wonder if this is because I know that the Infinity Ward guys did do the original Medal of Honor games. I think they might have moved on by the time they've probably gone on to go found Infinity Ward, and I think they were working on the first Call of Duty game probably by the time Medal of Honor Frontline came out. But this was definitely the most successful of the Medal of Honor games on the PS2. And it was a cool game. It wasn't one that I finished, and it's not one that might would probably hold up super well today in terms and compared to obviously modern first person shooters. But at the time, it was pretty awesome. It was super gritty. It starts with the invasion of Normandy, where you're storming the beach coming off of the boats, and that was like super memorable and really gritty at the time. And we kind of had never really seen anything like that before, and so that was really cool. It looked very cool at the time. So for just in terms of getting a first-person shooter on this list, it might actually be, I think it is the most successful first-person shooter on the PlayStation 2, and so for that reason, I thought it made sense to put on this list, and just from personal experience, I can tell anecdotally, I can tell you that it definitely hit its audience. Like it was something that my dad was picking up for himself, to play on the PS2 when I wasn't around. So definitely hit a wider audience than many PlayStation 2 games did. So. That's the reason I've included on this list. Number 12, I have Need for Speed Underground. That is the 23rd best-selling game on the PlayStation 2 with 3.69 million units sold. If you were around at the time, then you know that Need for Speed was absolutely massive at this point. This was easily the peak of the Need for Speed series. It technically existed on, I think, the PS1. I definitely remember the Hot Pursuit titles before Need for Speed Underground. But Need for Speed Underground was definitely the peak of this series' popularity. I believe I know for a fact based on this that Need for Speed Underground 1 was the best selling of the Need for Speed games on the PlayStation 2. Personally, I played Need for Speed Underground 2. I never actually played Need for Speed Underground 1. And I think that is because I believe Need for Speed Underground 1 was a team game, and Need for Speed Underground 2 was E. I think that might be the reason that I played 2 over 1. And 2 was also really novel at the time as well because it was an open world game, and so I have a lot of fondness for that game, even though it was one that I never finished. But Need for Speed Underground 1 was the much higher seller. So my guess would be that a lot more people would have memories with Need for Speed Underground 1 rather than 2. It's also a lot more easy to pick up and play because it doesn't have the open world aspect to it. So I think that it might age better in that sense because of that. And just it was just the beginning of that franchise or that sub franchise, I guess, for the Need for Speed series. And like I said, this was just Need for Speed at its absolute peak in terms of cultural impact and just how widespread and popular that this series was. And so for that reason, I think it makes sense for Need for Speed Underground to be on there. I don't know why they don't ever go back to the Underground name. Like they still make Need for Speed games to this day, but they never call them Underground. And I wonder if they would get an automatic boost in sales just from people who are nostalgic for those old Underground games on the PS2 because that was definitely the peak of the popularity of this franchise. Number 11, I think I have my first. I mean, I guess SOCOM was a first party PlayStation 2 game. It definitely was because Zipper Interactive, I believe, was owned by Sony. And if they weren't, they were definitely contracted to work with Sony. But in terms of just like a heavy hitter, PS2, PlayStation, first party release. Well, technically it wasn't because they didn't actually acquire this studio until much later. But anyway, all that to say, my number 11 is Ratchet and Clank by Insomniac Games. This is the number 22 best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 3.71 million units. Is obviously a game that I played a lot on the PS2 back in the day. If you haven't, well, I think everybody's pretty much familiar with Ratchet and Clank at this point, but it's a third-person shooter platformer video game. This was the first game in the series. Obviously, came out in 2002, which is after Jak and Daxter, which was developed by Naughty Dog. And the game before this that Insomniac had made was Spyro Year of the Dragon, which is still one of my favorite of their, maybe my favorite actually, Insomniac games still to this day. But anyway, Ratchet and Clank was a really awesome game. It was extremely impressive visually, I can tell you that. Like, and I think still, if you go back and take a look at that game today, especially if you look, got it on an old CRT or whatever, really impressive graphically. Or you can go back to the HD collection on the PS3 and kind of get an idea of how impressive this game looked for the time. I don't. It wasn't my favorite game on the PS2. I definitely liked the third one better. Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. That was by far my favorite. And really, I think I like Going Commando better as well. I think this was just a series that just kind of got better as it went. But in terms of the most popularity on the console, Ratchet and Clank was the most successful on the PlayStation 2. And it also obviously was the beginning of the franchise. So for both of those reasons put together, that is why I selected the first one for this list. Ratchet and Clank one, it didn't actually have like something that's really popular with the series is the fact that your guns level up and it kind of introduces those RPG mechanics that way. Ratchet and Clank one actually did not have that. I think it was the only Ratchet and Clank game where your guns do not level up, and so that kind of makes it less replayable. Kind of has less hooks in terms of you could just sort of just use the guns that you like the best and just kind of stick with those. It didn't actually incentivize you to branch out, other than of course the limited ammo, but. The basic idea of the series was in place all the way back then. It still had great level designs. Ratchet and Clank themselves, Clank in particular, I think is a hilarious character. Ratchet was kind of like he was kind of a little bit more of an edgelord character back in the day. Like he and Clank kind of were at odds for a lot of the game. They didn't get along very well. But then that kind of comes full circle at the end where they kind of patch things up. And it's actually one of my cousin Brett's favorite scenes. I remember from back in the day. He loved that scene when they kind of reconcile at the end of the game. It's really cool. And you're going up against like this really slimy corporate guy called Chairman Drek, who is like, basically it's sort of like having some statements about capitalism all the way back then, where this guy was like ripping out pieces of other planets in order to create his perfect planet. And the reason that his race had to leave the planet that they already were on was because of basically pollution, and their game had their planet had become so polluted and overpopulated that they couldn't live there anymore. So there's some pretty interesting commentary there as well. But just in terms of the overall gameplay and platforming and everything like that, it was a really fun game, a game that I think was beloved by all who grew up with the PlayStation 2. And I just remember, gosh, it's such a technical marvel for the PlayStation 2. Like it's worth seeing just for that alone, I think. That's my number 11. Number 10 is maybe my most controversial pick on this list. It's definitely a hot take, but when you look at how successful this thing was, and just as a snapshot in history of the PlayStation 2, I think it would be an interesting inclusion. This what is I'm on number 11, number 10. My number 10 pick for the PlayStation 2 is the EyeToy Play specifically, which was the pack-in with the EyeToy. Now, if you're not familiar with the EyeToy was basically the Xbox 360 Kinect, except for way before the Kinect, and it also had games on it that were better than any game that was ever made for the Kinect, quite frankly. It was like a perfect example of PlayStation being way ahead of its time, as they have been many times over the course of history. Another example would be like with PlayStation Home, way before this whole metaverse crap was like such a big talking point. You had, all these billion-dollar companies investing billions of dollars into trying to get into Facebook, trying to get this metaverse thing going when PlayStation had actually created it back in like 2010 or whenever that thing opened. But anyway, iToy Play was an example of them hitting on this like way before the Kinect. I mean, the Kinect came out like 2010, and the iToy, gosh, when was this? I think this was 2003 when the iToy first came out. And it was super awesome too, and like super low price. Like you got the camera and the game iToy Play for like $40, I think, back in the day. and it just worked perfectly. You connected the EyeToy to via USB to the front of your PlayStation 2, and then bam, it just worked. And it had all these little mini games that you played that were all of them were memorable. I remember a lot of these to this day. I have a list pulled up here. You had Beat Freak. I definitely remember that. You're like kind of hitting discs as they across the corners of the screen as they move, kind of a music rhythm type game. Wishy Washy, you were cleaning like these windows. Soccer Craze, you were trying. It was like a keepy uppy game where you were kind of bouncing this soccer ball off your head. Boxing Chump, where you were like kind of boxing this robot. Kung Fu was the one that I played the most. I think was the most popular, where it was just like I guess you could call it like a whack-a-mole style game, but like enemies were like flying at you and you just kind of knocked them out of the way with your whatever you wanted to basically. There was other ones too, but those there was like a plate spinning one. But there was a lot of stuff like that. But man, it was just all those were just kind of bangers. Like it was before another good analog to this would be like that WarioWare on the Wii, Smooth Moves. It kind of like it was kind of like had some of that stuff going on, but obviously way before that. It was just super ahead of its time, and it was wacky and it was goofy, but it had a really nice art style and really nice character to it, and just a great example of. Kind of the ingenuity and the variety that you got on the PlayStation 2. It was made by the first party London studio, which unfortunately Sony closed a couple of years ago. But just a really it was just something that a lot of people have a lot of fond memories with, and I think that it would be such a cool idea to just include that in the box with the PlayStation 2 Classic. The iToy itself, the peripherals, super small, so you could easily fit it in the box. And I think a lot of people would actually be nostalgic and for that and actually have fun with that. So for that reason, I put iToy Play at number 10. Number nine on my list is, it's kind of slam dunks for me right now, quite frankly. So number nine on my list is Jak and Daxter. I mean, Jak and Daxter obviously is a legendary series in the PlayStation 2. It was the 17th best-selling game on the console with 4.2 million units sold. It was Naughty Dog's big game after they finished up with the Crash Bandicoot franchise. And they made obviously technically four Jak games because they did the racing game at the end of the PS2 life cycle. But Jak and Daxter 1 that came out in 2001, so it was a very early PS2 game, and it was just awesome. Like I just remember at that time, when you're a kid, it's more. I guess it's easier to have your mind blown by a video game, and Jak and Daxter was wow. It truly blew my mind when I saw it because I played a lot of. Platformers obviously during my time. That was definitely my favorite genre as a kid, as a young kid, and I grew up on them. So like on the PS1, I played all those. Played the Crash Bandicoots, played the Spyros, played like the Disney games, the Toy Story 2. You had a Bug's Life, all that stuff. And but Jak and Daxter was a true interconnected platforming world where all the levels were interconnected with each other, and you couldn't even teleport to most of them. You could teleport to different hubs across the world, but you pretty much just had to walk to these different levels, and it was all interconnected, no loads. It was just super impressive at the time, and I think even today, a really awesome platforming game. I think it's one of the best platformers ever made. I wouldn't put it number one. I wouldn't put it above like your Super Mario Galaxy, and I wouldn't put it above even like Psychonauts 2, which I think was a masterpiece in terms of a mixture of just ingenuity with platforming and then also storytelling. But I think I would put it above like your Super Mario 64, for example. I think it is a better game than that, and probably Sunshine as well, which came out around the same period. I think Jak and Daxter was just a super awesome game, even though it was super popular. I still think it might be a little bit underrated. I think in terms of just like the lineage of platforming video games. If you looked up a list today of the best platforming video games, Jak and Daxter would probably be on the list, but I don't think it would be as high as it should be. I think it was just a really awesome game and still would hold up extremely well today. Now, I don't know that the sequels hold up anywhere near as well. I was never as big of a fan of those. They were kind of going in more of a definitely influenced by Grand Theft Auto, and they were, you kind of went around an open world city and stole cars and shit like that. That wasn't, and Jak had a gun and, he started talking and he cursed and stuff. He was super edgy, if I called Ratchet edgy earlier. So, those are still fine games. They're not bad games at all. But that first Jak and Daxter is a classic that would certainly be a mainstay on any sort of PlayStation 2 classic, and is still a great game today. Number 8 on this list, I have the original God of War. I mean, that's obviously a no-brainer. The original God of War did sell more copies than God of War 2, not by much. God of War is the 14th best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 4.61 million units. God of War 2 is number 16. It sold 4.24 million units. The only game in between them Madden NFL 2005. Can't forget about that. But yeah, God of War 1 is obviously, it's the beginning of the series. It was the most successful on the PlayStation 2. I think, yeah, I think God of War 2 is probably slightly better, but not by a lot. Quite frankly, I'm not a huge fan of either of the God of War games. I wouldn't put either of them on my own personal list of PlayStation 2 games, which we're going to get into here shortly. But yeah, God of War, obviously a huge franchise for Sony first party on the PlayStation 2. You might even argue it's big. Well, I mean, I guess Gran Turismo was first party. That was probably its biggest technically in terms of copies sold. But God of War was just, it just hit such a wide audience. And it was a game, obviously, I did not play at the time. It was rated M. I was definitely not allowed to play anything like that. But it's a game that I went back and played later on in life. I've played through all of the God of War games to this day, even the handheld entries. And they're all solid games at least. I think for the most part, I think it's a series that just kind of gets better as it goes. I do think the more recent Sad Dad God of War games, as people like to call them, are the best ones. But still, it's you can't have a PlayStation 2 classic without the original God of War. It is such an iconic game from that that console, and you would absolutely have it. So that's my number 8. Number 7, I have this is a cool one. Dragon Quest VIII: Journey of the Cursed King or Cursed King. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that. It's the 12th best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 4.88 million units, and it was super popular at the time. I definitely remember this game being out. This is not a game that I ever. Well, I do own it now because I have gone back and kind of filled up some of the gaps in my PlayStation 2 catalog, but it is not a game that I had at the time. However, there was one time when I had a demo disc, and I don't actually know what demo disc it was because it's not one of my mainstay demo discs that I have to this day. So I don't know where I would have done this. It must have not been a demo disc that I owned. It must have been maybe I borrowed a friend's demo disc or something. There was one day where I played a demo of Dragon Quest VIII, and I was just blown away by it. I thought it looked so cool. It had that cel shaded art style that was super popular at the time. The artist is what is that guy's name? Akira Toriyama, I think is his name. He recently died. He was the artist of the Dragon Ball series, and the characters definitely are in that art style. But I'd never played any of the Dragon Quest games. I still haven't really played any of them. The most Dragon Quest, well, I guess the Dragon Quest game I played the most of was Dragon Quest Heroes Rocket Slime, I think it was called on the DS. That was a cool game. But yeah, that one day where I played the demo for Dragon Quest VIII, and I never even got to the end of it. It was super long. You got to play a ton of this game, but I just remember going around, and this is kind of before I had really played any JRPGs outside of the Pokemon games, and just having and Digimon, I guess I also had on the PS1, but outside of those, like this was the first kind of my first kind of exposure to a JRPG and seeing it on the screen and how beautiful it was at the time, and I just really enjoyed the colorful nature of the world and just kind of going around in that world and just getting in random encounters is basically all I was doing from what I remember, whenever I played this 20 years ago. But gosh, I just thought it was really cool. And I know it was extremely popular. It has to be the best-selling Dragon Quest game, at least in the US. And it's a game that I think would be an awesome inclusion on on a PS2 classic. Like you want to have some JRPGs on that kind of on those consoles. I think that was a big selling point. At least it was for me. Is the reason I picked up the SNES Classic back in the day, and it was actually there where I played Final Fantasy VI for the first time. And I think it would be an amazing experience to have something similar on a PlayStation 2 Classic, playing Dragon Quest VIII, Journey for the Cursed King for the first time. So I think that would be an awesome inclusion. It's definitely a game that I would like to go back and play because it's definitely one that I missed that I know I would enjoy today. Number 6 on this list is Kingdom Hearts. Kind of a no-brainer. I know a lot of people like Kingdom Hearts 2 more than Kingdom Hearts 1, but Kingdom Hearts 1 sold significantly more copies than Kingdom Hearts 2 actually on the PS2. Kingdom Hearts 1 is the 10th best-selling PS2 game with 5.9 million copies sold. Kingdom Hearts 2 is the 13th best-selling PS2 game with 4.76 million copies sold. So actually sold over 1 million units less than Kingdom Hearts 2. I also think asking someone to start with Kingdom Hearts 2 would be a big ask. The main reason it's here is because of the fact that it is the more popular of the two in terms of just game copies sold at the time. But I will admit, it is also my favorite of the two. I think that Kingdom Hearts 1 is a masterpiece. Obviously, I talked about this at great length way back when I did that podcast of my top 25 greatest video games of all time. Kingdom Hearts has not moved an inch on that list. Well, actually, that's not really true because I think Bloodborne is my number two now. But it's other than that, it's so I guess it's currently on number three on my list of the greatest video games ever made. I absolutely love it. I think that it was just such a bonkers genius concept at the time. It's one of those ideas where it's like, man, that is just genius right there. It's kind of like Pokemon or Toy Story. It's just one of those ideas where you're just like, wow, that is absolutely brilliant. It absolutely was perfect for that period and just like the culture of where we were in the United States in 2002 when it came out. It mixed obviously the great Final Fantasy characters with the Disney characters, which is what I was really excited about at the time because I was such a huge Disney fan as a young child. Then it had this original story with these original characters just interacting between the two, and it was just so brilliant. I think it's one of the most genius concepts ever come up with by Square, and I think it's so cool that Disney signed off on that. And it seemed like Square had a lot of freedom too. Like I think some of the more recent Kingdom Hearts games, Disney might be a little bit more strict about what they're allowed to do, but back then, man, it's like they kind of felt like they had carte blanche and they did some really clever stuff there. I thought the story was extremely touching. I think the ending is incredible. I love the gameplay. I think that everything kind of works in tandem in that gameplay compared to Kingdom Hearts 2, where it was a lot more high action. You didn't have to think about it as much. And then I thought the story, this is kind of before the Kingdom Hearts story got like super complicated and a little off the rails. And so I just love the focused nature of the first game. I just think it is just such a masterpiece. So you got to have Kingdom Hearts 1 on any sort of PS2 classic. Number five, I have Tekken 5, which is the eighth best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 6 million copies. Never really got into the Tekken series. I have Tekken 4 on the PS2, but my understanding is that that's kind of actually one of the least liked Tekken games. And so Tekken 5, on the other hand, was extremely popular, obviously, with its units sold. I don't know if it was more popular than the PS1 Tekken games, but it might have been. The only other one that I think would give it a run is like maybe Tekken 3. Tekken 3 was extremely popular on the Tekken on the PS1. I definitely remember Tekken 3. Like I remember going over to friends' houses and it was like, oh yeah, this is a famous game. But I don't know that it's I actually don't know if it is more because 6 million copies on the PS2. That's extremely impressive. That is okay. Well, here it says Tekken 3 sold 8.36 million copies on the PlayStation, so didn't quite sell as many as that, but it's probably the second best-selling Tekken game. So yeah, I don't really know anything about Tekken 5 specifically. I know the Tekken series actually has like an ongoing storyline, which I think is awesome and sort of hilarious between like Jin and his father Mishima. So that's cool. But really, just it was by far the most popular fighting game on the PlayStation 2, and it was definitely a PlayStation franchise. I know it was an arcade game as well, but the console the Tekken games were exclusive to the PS2 console, the PS1 console, and so you just kind of it was just such a huge part of the DNA of the PlayStation 2, and you got to have it on this list. So I've got it here at number five. Number four, I have Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty, another absolutely massive game on the PlayStation 2. It is the seventh best-selling game on the console. It sold 7.03 million copies. Very impressive. This is another one of those early PlayStation 2 games. It came out in 2001. It also was not that long after the original Metal Gear Solid that came out in 1998, but the leap in quality and graphics was just unbelievable at the time. It's hard for people, I think, to understand how big of a leap the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2 really was. And Metal Gear Solid 2 was a huge part of really hitting that home, as was Kingdom Hearts, quite frankly. Kingdom Hearts looked amazing, obviously, compared to like those Disney games we were all playing on the PS1, but man, Metal Gear Solid 2 was so huge. This is a game that I have never played. I've never played any of the Metal Gear Solid games. Not one. It's definitely the biggest gap that I have as a PlayStation fan. I think I'm literally wearing a PlayStation shirt right now with the old school PlayStation logo on it. I'm a huge PlayStation fan. It's been a huge part of my history just as a human being on this planet. But Metal Gear Solid is the biggest PlayStation associated series that I have never played. And that's not entirely true. I've played like an hour or two of the first Metal Gear Solid, but that's it. But I kind of get the idea. Metal Gear Solid 2 was a big deal at the time. It definitely kind of had this bait and switch thing where all the marketing going in, the very last was part two in a way, where all the marketing going in was kind of hyping you up for the return of Snake, and then it just totally went against those expectations where you don't play as Snake for the majority of the game. You play as this other character named Raiden, and that was like a cool bait and switch. You never really see anything like that in a game. I thought that was very clever, and kind of definitely one of the most interesting games ever released, Metal Gear Solid 2. And obviously it has a bonkers story, and the gameplay I'm sure is really great. I got to go back and play that. I wish I had more to say about it, but you definitely cannot have a PlayStation 2 classic without Metal Gear Solid. And Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 was also a super big game on the PlayStation 2. It sold 4 million units, and it was and then also in the top 20 best-selling games. But wow, Metal Gear Solid 2 almost doubled its sales. It was from 4 million to 7.03 million. So you got to give it to Metal Gear Solid 2 in terms of which one you put on the console. That's my number four pick. My number three is Final Fantasy X, which is the sixth best-selling PlayStation 2 game. It sold 8.5 million copies. Huge, huge game. Came out in 2001. 2001 was an absolutely insane year for the PlayStation 2, as anyone who was around at that time knows. Final Fantasy X was absolutely massive. It wasn't quite to the level of fame as Final Fantasy VII and mainstream reach as Final Fantasy VII, but it was close. It was kind of near that level, quite frankly. It's just like Final Fantasy is a huge franchise today, and Final Fantasy 16 sold. I think it's definitely sold more than 3 million copies, and it was really awesome. I loved that game and everything, and like you got the Final Fantasy obviously remake series, but Final Fantasy 10 sold more, it was like bigger than those. Final Fantasy X was such a huge game. 8 million copies sold on the PlayStation 2 alone, and obviously it's been remastered and ported to like every PlayStation console since, basically. Not basically, literally. But yeah, this is a game that I haven't played Final Fantasy X all the way through. I've played a little bit of it. It's definitely my biggest blind spot in terms of the Final Fantasy series, which is of course my favorite video game series of all time. I have played a lot of those games. I've played 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15, 16, and of course 7 Remake and most of 7 Rebirth. I still haven't actually finished that game, but I've played certainly the majority of it. Final Fantasy X, I actually played before all those because I had it on the PlayStation 2 and 12. Those were I think 12 was actually the first Final Fantasy game I ever touched. But they were kind of a little bit too complicated for me at the time. I just wasn't really ready to really dive into super complicated JRPGs like that back then. But for a lot of people, Final Fantasy X was their introduction to Final Fantasy, and if it wasn't, it was their biggest this is the graphical leap from that to the PS1 from the PS1 Final Fantasy games two, which were already very impressive on the PS1, to Final Fantasy X on the PS2 in 2001. For it to be so early in the life cycle of that console and to look as good as it does was just unbelievable. And then I really like that it has traditional, true turn-based combat as well. I think that probably worked to its benefit. It was the first Final Fantasy game with voice acting, which kind of got some mixed results on that, quite frankly, but certainly I think added to the mainstream appeal for it. Yeah, it was just a huge game, and it's one of those that's just like a must-have on any PlayStation 2 classic. And I think in terms of all of the PlayStation 2 games that exist, it's the one that I need to play the most for sure, and I will at some point, hopefully in the near future, go in and fill that hole. And I think what's worth pointing out too is when I finally play Final Fantasy X, I do plan on playing it on my PlayStation 2. My understanding is that they actually lost the source code to Final Fantasy X for the remake for the HD remaster. I can't remember exactly what the deal was there, but as a result of that, like a lot of the character models are like screwed up in the remastered version. Like they don't have the level of expressiveness that they had on the PlayStation 2. And I didn't know about that for a long time. But then like whenever I saw like it kind of recently people were talking about that online and I saw the side by side comparison. As soon as I saw that and how drastic the difference was, I was like, oh, that is sickening. If I'm definitely playing the PlayStation 2 original, and that takes a lot for me to say that too, because I love trophy hunting. Final Fantasy X has a legendary platinum trophy. It's apparently very difficult and time consuming to get, and it's something that I probably would have gone for. But because the character models and just like the art is so much worse on the HD versions, Yeah, I gotta play. I want to play it in its best version, and the best version is the PlayStation 2 version, which is hopefully the version that they would put on the PlayStation 2 Classic. I don't know if they still have access to that, but in an ideal world, it is anyway. And so, yeah, whenever I play that game, hopefully in the near future, I will go back to the PlayStation 2 version. So I think that's worth pointing out. So obviously, yeah, Final Fantasy 10, 8+ million copies sold. You have to have it on the PS2. Okay, number two then is Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. A-Spec is also the number two best-selling PlayStation 2 game. Guys, it sold 14.89 million copies. Listen to what I just said about Final Fantasy X and how big that was. Everybody knew about Final Fantasy X. Everybody knew about Kingdom Hearts, and Kingdom Hearts sold 5.9 million copies. Final Fantasy X sold 8.5 million copies. Gran Turismo 3, 14.89 million copies sold. The Gran Turismo series, I think you kind of had to be there. You just don't understand unless you lived it. How popular and famous the Gran Turismo franchise was. For me, that goes back to the original. Gran Turismo One was the one where I was first exposed to the series on the PS1. My dad had a PS1. He bought it for him. He played the absolute hell out of Gran Turismo One on the PS1. We played multiplayer together, but he which they in like this arcade mode they had, but he played the main story, I guess. There's no story, but the campaign, I guess, mode, if you will. Called it simulation mode, I think, back then. And it was just so awesome. It was like this art. It was an RPG with cars, basically. It's been called a car PG, and it was just. It just I don't really it's hard to really explain why it was so popular. I mean, just like racing games in general were very popular at that time. They were very popular in arcades, and so Gran Turismo was it looked awesome, but it was also just so much deeper than your typical arcade racer. It was a sim racer, and for some reason, that just really hit a extremely wide audience, and it was super wide. I think across the world too. It was a truly global game. It was very popular here in the U.S., but it was also extremely popular in Europe and Japan, which are all of the major markets for the PlayStation, still to this day even. And Gran Turismo 3, I do own Gran Turismo 3. I think I booted it up a, a little for just like a short go of it back in the PS2 days, but I didn't play it like I did Gran Turismo 1. That was the one that I definitely played by far the most, and I actually have gone back and finished Gran Turismo 1, and I love that game. Gran Turismo 3 though is better in every way, realistically. The graphics are unbelievable at the time. This was another 2001 video game for the PlayStation 2. Like seriously, I think the best year any console has ever had is 2001 for the PlayStation 2, and we're seeing it right now on this list. Just absolutely unbelievable. It looked incredible at the time, just like so many of those other PlayStation 2 games did. And it just had so many tracks, so many cars, so much depth to this game. You could spend dozens of hours playing Gran Turismo 3 on the PlayStation 2, and so many people did. Truly a great game. One that I do want to go back. I am kind of interested in going back and playing, but there have been pretty much every Gran Turismo game that comes out is even better. So that's not entirely true, but um, they have one on the PS5 that I'm very interested in. But I have collected most of the games in the series, or if not all of them, and I think what you'd be surprised to learn is that all of them hold up extremely well, are extremely deep, and are extremely fun to play even to this day. And Gran Turismo 3, in terms of, I still think Gran Turismo 1, in terms of just hitting the widest zeitgeist, just like it was just so unbelievably popular on the PlayStation 1, and it just really, it was just, it's hard to explain how popular it was. It was like I think there was probably more people. I don't I, you know this I'm just pulling this out of my ass, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more people playing Gran Turismo in the '90s than there were people watching like hockey or like like a major sport that is big in the United States. Just Gran Turismo was just so big. I mean, 15 million copies sold on the PlayStation 2. That's so many. That's so many. It like you can't get 15 million people to watch like almost anything these days, other than like in terms of like television. Like you have like a major show that comes out, and almost none of them are going to hit 15 million viewers. 15 million people playing PS2 or Gran Turismo 3 and on the PS2. It's hard to fathom, but yeah, obviously it's got to be on this list and it's my number two. But my number one, kind of no surprise, is a Grand Theft Auto game. You have to have a Grand Theft Auto game that was the really the birthplace. Technically, it was the PS1 was the birthplace of Grand Theft Auto, but in terms of just like where it hit 3D realm and just really got to that next level, you got to do a Gran Turismo game on the PS2. It just this is the reason that was where Gran Turismo became the most popular and successful franchise in video games, and as it is to this day. And I think a lot of people, and realistically, if they made a PS2 classic, I think the most likely scenario is they would pick Grand Theft Auto 3. Grand Theft Auto 3 is the fifth best-selling PlayStation 2 game. It sold 11.6 million units. It came out in that golden year of 2001, changed everything immediately, like literally overnight. It changed everything. However, Grand Theft Auto 3 is the worst and the least popular of the Grand Theft Auto games on the PlayStation 2. And so for that reason, I would not choose it. I would choose the number one best-selling game on the PlayStation 2, which is Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas sold 17.33 million units on the PlayStation 2 alone. It was by far the biggest Grand Theft Auto on the PlayStation 2. It was by far the best-selling Grand Theft Auto on the PlayStation 2. Quite frankly, it was the best Grand Theft Auto on the PlayStation 2. I have not played a ton of any of the PS2 Grand Theft Auto games. I have played through Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5. Love them both. I think they're great games. I think they're better games, frankly, than the PS2 Grand Theft Autos. But in terms of like at this time, I'm telling you, man, everybody knew Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I obviously did not own it during the peak of its popularity. I did end up getting the Grand Theft Auto collection on the PlayStation 2 a little bit later on. You could get like all three of them for like $30. It was insane. God, games were so affordable and amazing in this era. But yeah, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was so big at the time. Everybody was either playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas or they knew people that were playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It was truly one of the biggest video games. It was the biggest video game of the era of probably that decade. Quite frankly, you had like how you think about how like popular Halo was. It was not as popular as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Now today, obviously the gaming public is much wider, and they play stuff like Fortnite that's free, or Minecraft that's extremely cheap, and kind of like these live service games. Also, obviously Grand Theft Auto 5 online, like all those games are way more popular and famous than Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was, even at its peak. But at its peak, it hit the general audience unlike almost any game had before at that time. It was just so unbelievably popular and successful and good, really. It was a great game at the time. So for that reason, that's the Grand Theft Auto I picked for this list. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, number one on my list for the PS2 classic lineup for the masses, if you will. So now it's time to get into my list, my personal list, my personal lineup for a dream PlayStation 2 classic of my own. So these are basically my top 20 PlayStation 2 games. However, as I was getting ready to record this podcast today, I realized that there were a couple of games that I needed to put on this list that I didn't actually finish. I think they would be in my top 20 favorite PlayStation 2 games, but because I have not finished them, I can't really definitively put them on my list of games that I finished, and therefore what I was going for the majority of this the list here. So what I've done is I've actually put together my top 20 games, my top 20 favorite games on the PlayStation 2 that I have finished. But then I have included three other games that I think have the potential to be on this list if I did actually finish them. So I really have like 23 games. And so we're just going to start from number 23 and we're going to go to the top. And this is basically my top 20 or top 23 games on the PlayStation 2. Some of them, I'll let you know which ones I didn't actually finish. One of the ones I didn't actually finish is number 23. That is Star Wars Jedi Starfighter. This is a game that I have played very deep. I have almost finished Star Wars Jedi Starfighter, but I have not actually finished it. And so I can't definitively say where it would be on the list, but I think it would be on there. This was you know, it was the golden age of Star Wars games on the PS2. There were so many to choose from, and the majority of them were good. Star Wars Jedi Starfighter came out in 2002. It was actually the sequel to the original Star Wars Starfighter, which came out, I think, in 2001. Yeah, it was 2001. They were putting those games out really fast. I actually have finished Star Wars Starfighter, but I liked Jedi Starfighter significantly more. It was it was really a tie-in game into to Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, came out that same year. But realistically, the story it tells is pretty separate from that. It just kind of ties into the movie at the very end, and it was really fun. It had really good controls. It was one of those Ace Combat like flight arcade flight games, like I was talking about earlier. But obviously with the Star Wars license, and that automatically made it a lot more exciting to me as a child. But it just had really great presentation. You played a variety of different ships, actually. The cover star is the Jedi Starfighter. And you do spend quite a bit of time in the Jedi Starfighter, but you actually play in different ships. So it's a story with multiple protagonists, and they all have their own ships. And they had like some kind of very creative ships. I remember the Havoc bomber was the one that I probably enjoyed the most. And it actually told a decent little story of kind of this sort of conspiracy of well, not so much a conspiracy, but kind of like this like hidden sect of the uh I guess the separatists that were they kind of had created like this sort of bio weapon that were sort of like a sort of like they would poison the atmospheres of planets, or they were trying to. So that was really cool. But just like the moment to moment gameplay was really strong. This was just a very it was very intuitive to play. It was really felt good on a controller with twin sticks, and very impressive graphically, and a lot of variety in the missions and the gameplay as well, because like all the ships really did handle and play very differently. So really enjoyed Jedi Starfighter. Didn't quite never quite finished it, but I think it would probably be I think it would have a good shot of actually making the top 20. Right now I have it at 23. Number 22, I have Jak 2. This is a game that I did finish. And it was originally number 20 on this list, but I did add a couple later on of games that I didn't finish that I think realistically I'd rather see on here than Jak 2. Jak 2 is a good game. It's obviously the sequel to Jak and Daxter. I talked about that already, about how this is where they got a lot more dark, and they were going in that Grand Theft Auto vein where they were kind of trying to be all edgy and everything, like and you steal cars, you're in an open world city, it's futuristic and stuff, and they still had like some platforming, but there's a lot of shooting. It was more of a shooter, really, a third person shooter than a platformer. But I never thought the shooting was anywhere near as polished or felt as good as the shooting in Ratchet and Clank. But I did actually like Jak 2 more than Ratchet and Clank 1. I do not have Ratchet and Clank 1 on my own personal list. And I think that's just because I liked the story of Jak 2 more, and I did like the open world aspect of it. I do remember it was really cool at the time. Like it was actually not a bad decision by Naughty Dog to go in this direction. It seems really weird now, but they were probably right, because I remember I was the target audience, and I did think that the open world and kind of darker nature of Jak 2 was awesome at the time. I was definitely fell hook, line, and sinker for that. I don't think it holds up as well now as Jak and Daxter 1, and I don't think it's as impressive as Jak and Daxter 1 is, and I don't think it's as good as Jak and Daxter 1 is. But at the time, I think it was probably the right game for them to make. And so I was so excited for it at the time. I really had a lot of fun with it back in the day. And so for those reasons, like I do think I wanted to put it on this list, and it's kind of more of an honorable mention spot here because it doesn't quite crack the top 20. But in terms of like the top, it is my literal number 20 of my top PS2 games that I have actually finished. Like I said, there's a couple above that I've kind of slotted up here that I haven't actually finished. So I'm quite confident that they would be above Jak 2 realistically, but as it stands right now, it's my number 20 PS2 game of all time that I've finished. Number 22 on this list. Number 21 kind of goes hand in hand is Ratchet and Clank, but this is Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. This is a game that I have finished. It is the sequel to Ratchet and Clank 1. I think it's similar in quality. There's not a huge gap between the two of them, but I do think Going Commando is better, and that it was the first one that had the leveling up guns. It had the RPG mechanics with the guns. And I think that is so crucial to the central hook of what makes Ratchet and Clank super addictive and fun. And so for that reason, I have it above Ratchet and Clank 1 and also Jak 2. I do think it is more mechanically sound than Jak 2 and Ratchet and Clank 1. I do kind of like the storytelling of Ratchet and Clank 1 a little better. I definitely remember like the main villain a lot more. He was a lot more memorable than the one in Going Commando, but mechanically Going Commando was stronger. And for the reason of introducing the RPG mechanics with the guns, I have it here at number 21 on this list. It's my number 19 overall for PS2 games. Now, number 20 on this list. This is a game that I spent a ton of time playing on the PlayStation 2. I absolutely loved it at the time. It hasn't aged super well. It was really awesome when it came out in like 2005. And that is Destroy All Humans. Now they have remade this game on modern consoles. I did give that a shot. I absolutely hated it. Hated that remake. My most despised remake I've ever seen. They screwed up a lot of the mechanics of it, and I absolutely despised it. But the original Destroy All Humans made by Pandemic Studios, same studio that made the Star Wars Battlefront games, and then also the Mercenaries games for the PS2 and Xbox. But Destroy All Humans, it was so awesome. It was like a big sandbox. There were different like levels to a degree, but they were kind of open hubs, so there weren't really that many levels. And then that you would go to like 6 or 7 different parts of the U.S. But you'd have like different uh, missions whenever you would go, and so you would kind of go to these levels multiple times, but you'd experience them in different ways, and almost like a Super Mario 64 style to it, which was really fun. But just like the level of mayhem that you could do, the physics engine was extremely impressive. The humor of it, I guess I was a target audience, and I don't know that a lot of it would be as funny to me today as it was back then, but I just thought it was hilarious at the time. We did do a Wildfire Gaming one-off episode of it on our YouTube channel. You can check that out if you're interested in seeing kind of what it is like in action with Sean and my commentary over the top. But yeah, it was a super fun game. Fun uh, variety of weaponry. Using the flying saucer was fun. The level of destruction you could unleash on the environments was very impressive. It kind of had a Grand Theft Auto style wanted system that was super fun, and the actual story and campaign was going through that was fun too. But it was kind of like Grand Theft Auto in the sense that the most fun, at least for me, was just raising hell in that world. And I remember like staying home from sick from school and just like playing Destroy All Humans with reckless abandon because I kind of wasn't really supposed to have it yet when I had it, I think, and so I was able to play it without any fear of being caught, and it was just God, those are some amazing memories on the PlayStation 2. Was skipping school and playing Destroy All Humans, just golden memories, truly. Number 19 is the first game that I had on my previous list on the one for the masses, and that is Lego Star Wars. So I already kind of talked about what I loved about Lego Star Wars. Everything that I said for reasons that it should be on the list for the masses. I also have it for me. It's one of my favorite PlayStation 2 games. Definitely spent a ton of time with it and have a lot of fond memories with it. So that's my number 19 pick. Number 18 is kind of a weird one. Definitely not one that you would ever see included on an actual PlayStation Classic, but this is one that I spent countless hours playing and never had a bad time playing it. My number 18 is NBA 2K7. And it is the only NBA 2K game I have ever played or gotten into at all. But this was, if yeah, I'm from the Northeast Texas, so from the Dallas area. And if 2006 was when we made it to the finals and then lost. The Mavericks made it to the finals and lost to the Miami Heat. And it was very heartbreaking for people here at the time. But the Mavericks were super popular. They were like rock stars at that time. And they had an awesome lineup of guys that was like super memorable. Dirk Nowitzki was by far the most famous. He's like a true like local hero around here. But they also had like Jason Terry, who was very popular. I remember this guy Jerry Stackhouse was pretty big. You had Devin Harris, I think was his name, was big. I remember Jop, who was like the center that we had. I just remember a lot of these guys. We had Crozier. Our head coach was Avery Johnson. It was just such a big time for basketball in the Dallas area. And I got this game. I loved the gameplay of it. I really loved the mode where you could like kind of draft your own team and kind of have your own team and go through a season. I never actually made it through an entire season, but I did spend a lot of time doing that. But most of the time that I spent playing this game was with my dad, and we just played each other, competitive. And at first I would beat his ass, but then like he would have me like leave it there for while when I'd go home, and then I'd come back 2 weeks later. He'd been playing it, after work, and he was getting pretty good. So eventually he got to the point where he could beat me pretty good. We had some competitive games on NBA 2K7. They were always fun. Really great game, really great multiplayer game. Some of the most fun I've ever had multiplayer was playing NBA 2K7 with him. So, for that reason, this list is very personal to me. This is my own personal pick. My personal favorite PlayStation 2 games, NBA 2K7 would be there. Number 17, I have Guitar Hero 2. I mentioned earlier that it's totally unrealistic to have Guitar Hero in a PlayStation 2 classic for the masses just because of the logistics of it. But I still have my PlayStation 2 guitars. So if I could just like hook that up to the PlayStation 2 Classic and play it, I absolutely would. I loved Guitar Hero 2. This was the first Guitar Hero I ever played. It was the newest one at the time. It was before Guitar Hero 3 came out. Went over to a friend's house and played it and couldn't believe how fun it was and pretty much immediately got it for myself. And I've loved it ever since. I mean, Guitar Hero is like that's another series. It's just like if you weren't there, you don't understand how big and how successful Guitar Hero was. It was an absolutely massive franchise that everybody played at the time, and it actually inspired many people to become a real guitarist. Not me, but my brother became a real guitarist and a great one at that because of being exposed to it through Guitar Hero, and it definitely shaped our. It helped get us into music. Like I'm such a gigantic music person now, and Guitar Hero was just such a huge part of getting me onto that. Now my taste is broadened significantly beyond just like the hard rock and metal stuff that you would find on a Guitar Hero, but yeah, at the time that was huge. Like that was all I listened to basically, because I grew up and the only music I had access to was like my mom listened to a bunch of Christian music, and then I go over to my dad's. He listened to a bunch of country music, and I wasn't a big fan of either of those. But man, when I was playing Guitar Hero, I was like, damn, I loved a lot of that music, and so yeah, that really got me into rock and roll really in a big way. And just the gameplay was so genius. Another one of those ideas, like kind of I was talking about earlier, like Toy Story or Kingdom Hearts or Pokemon. It's like one of those just genius ideas that you know, it's just one of those ideas that anybody can see. Oh yeah, that's that's brilliant. It's just kind of an unadulterated, great idea, and it hit everybody at the time. So yeah, you got to. I would love to have Guitar Hero 2 on there, and in terms of like my most played PS2 games, it'd be super high. Obviously high on my list of my favorite PS2 games. Number 16 on my personal list would be Psychonauts. Obviously, Psychonauts was not a huge seller. It's not a game that you would probably put on a PlayStation 2 Classic for that reason. Not a lot of people played it on the PS2 back in the day. But since then, obviously, the series has become a lot more popular now, thanks in large part to Psychonauts 2, and just like how famous Tim Schafer is and how people just love Tim Schafer, I think, as a creator beyond just the games that he makes. But I do too, quite frankly. But I love Psychonauts. I actually played Psychonauts back in the day on the PS2, and I never got all the way through it until later on in life. I think it was 2021 when I finally played through it all for the first time and got that platinum trophy on the PS5. But yeah, I love Psychonauts 1, and I put my time in with it on the PS2. I think it's a great platformer. So it doesn't, the mechanics are pretty clunky, I'm not going to lie, but in terms of just the creativity of the level, truly some of the greatest um, platforming levels ever made. Most certainly, I would say the most creative platforming levels ever made. I do think Psychonauts 2 is much better game, but Psychonauts 1 for its time was just absolutely amazing, and something that for any PlayStation 2 classic geared toward me would be absolutely essential. Number 15, this is the first. I actually have them right next to each other. These next two games are the games that I added today, kind of the last editions. These are the ones that I have not actually played all the way through, but that I did spend a lot of time with during my time with the PlayStation 2 as a kid. And they're both kind of in the same genre. And they were both really big for me and my family at the time. And number 15 is Burnout Revenge. So the Burnout series was extremely popular at this time. It was a extremely high octane arcade racer. It wasn't as much about the racing in Burnout. It was about like creating as much havoc as you possibly could, just like making the biggest wrecks basically and just destroying everybody else on the road. But you didn't have like weapons or anything. Your car was just like for some reason basically invulnerable. And you would just bash everybody with your car and just create like these gigantic explosions. And there was this multiplayer mode called Crash Mode where you would literally just drive into an intersection and cause the biggest crash that you possibly could. And if you created a big enough one, you could set your car off like a nuclear bomb and just like bam, just make an even bigger explosion. I would actually play a lot of that with my stepdad. So it was my biological dad I played NBA 2K7 with. my stepdad, we would play Burnout Revenge and we'd play Crash Mode specifically. And we spent a lot of time, had a lot of good time, a lot of good memories playing Burnout Revenge. And it was a really awesome game. Looked very impressive at the time. The frame rate was unbelievable for the PlayStation 2. Very high quality game and a lot of fun. And I think it would hold up very well today. Number 14, I talked about Need for Speed Underground 1 on the list for the masses. But for me, my vote would be for Need for Speed Underground 2. It's another game I spent dozens of hours with. I never probably even came close to finishing it because it was, and the reason for that is because it was open world, and eventually it got to this point where like it wouldn't tell you where you were supposed to go. You were supposed to just drive around the city and find races, which was really stupid, and not something that you see in open world racing games of any stripe today. I don't think. It was like the game didn't even want you to finish it, which was really annoying. But in terms of just like the car customization, was super fun. The soundtrack was unbelievable, like super nostalgic, very mid 2000s rock and hip hop. Loved that. I thought the open world was so fun. I just absolutely loved driving around in that open world. It was beautiful. The graphics at the time were beautiful, and just had this kind of car collection and tuning aspect to it. God, it was just so fun. It's so popular and for good reasons. So for me, yeah, I know for the masses, probably Need for Speed Underground 1 makes most sense, but for me, it'd be Underground 2. Number 13 is, so from here on out, I've beaten all these games. And these are truly my top 13 favorite PlayStation 2 games. Number 13 is, boy, the most, I would say, mid 2000s pick on this list. Number 13 is the Urbz, Sims in the City. So the Urbz was like this kind of urban spin-off of the Sims, where like the Sims, you kind of live in the suburbs and you build your house and you build your character up and kind of through his job career path. But the Urbz is all about like being in this gigantic city, and you went around to the different districts in the city. It became like you did jobs, but they weren't careers. You weren't on any career path. Your goal was to become the most popular herb in the city, and so the emphasis was completely on social interaction with the other herbs, and like you would have to go into the different districts, and they'd all have their own styles and kind of the things that they were into, like the kind of interactions that would work on them. Basically a bunch of different subcultures, quite frankly, if you want to get into sociological terms. And you would have to go in there and kind of infiltrate them each time. Like you would do the same job that they do. You would kind of dress like them to kind of get in with them, and you'd have to build up your popularity, and then you'd get into the nightclub. You had to get past the bouncer. That was always a big moment when you got into the nightclub for the first time. And you had it was a very checklisty game. You had all these things to check off, and I love checklists in video games. And a lot of I know some people don't, but for me, that just totally works with the way that my brain is wired. And so, yeah, I was checklisting like you wouldn't believe. I have 100% of that game. I think it's so fun. You could play the entire thing split screen co-op, and that was extremely fun as well. God, it was just such an extreme. It's just so awesome. And it had all this random stuff in there. The freaking Black Eyed Peas were in the game, and they all hung out on Cosmo Street, which was one of the districts. And it was actually the district that I started out going to because I thought it was the most similar to my hometown, which it really wasn't super similar to it because obviously it was in a big city and I grew up in a very small town, but it wasn't one of the super busy urban districts, and so it was more laid back, and I really loved that area. And I don't think, well, I definitely know as a kid, I didn't even understand that those characters were like Fergie and Apple D App and Will I Am and all them. I did not even know that they were the Black Eyed Peas because I wasn't listening to music at that time. I didn't give a shit about the Black Eyed Peas. I just knew them as these characters in the Urbz, and like they were my buddies in the Urbz, hanging out with these guys that ended up being were actually the Black Eyed Peas. So yeah, I just have so many fun memories with the Urbz. It's never stops sounding like a fun game to play. Like even now, talking about it, it's like if I stopped playing or stopped this podcast, wrapped up this podcast, and went and played the Urbz, I guarantee you I would have a good time. On the Wildfire Gaming channel, we did an entire playthrough of the Urbz. We didn't 100% it, but we did go through all the different districts, and I became the most popular herb or whatever, enough to get credit. So that was super fun. It was one of my favorite series that we did on Wildfire Gaming. I thought it was hilarious. I think it's an extremely rewatchable series as well. But yeah, I just absolutely love the Urbz. I love the Sims in general that were very popular during the era, the mid 2000s. Like that was like, well, really the early to mid 2000s. Like it started off in the early, I think literally 2000s when the Sims came out on PC. But it was a little after that when we finally got it on consoles. But it was pretty much just as popular on consoles. Maybe not just as popular on consoles as it was in on PC, but for me, somebody that didn't really have a good PC to play games on, it was extremely popular on consoles, and the Urbz was definitely my favorite. Not my favorite. It's the one that I spent the most time with, probably. Number 12, I have Guitar Hero 3, Legends of Rock. So obviously another Guitar Hero. By the way, in case you didn't notice, I am not restricting myself to one game per franchise for my own personal list. But I do hit a lot of different franchises here, regardless. But yeah, Guitar Hero 3, for me, Guitar Hero 3, I think was when that series was at its peak in terms of popularity. This was like right before, because the next game that came out after this was Rock Band, and so Rock Band kind of sort of ate Guitar Hero's lunch, quite frankly. I don't know if it ever ate it in terms of like popularity, but I do think it became more popular than Guitar Hero eventually. And Rock Band is a better game, quite frankly. But Guitar Hero 3 at the time was just so unbelievably fun. And I think that it was the most popular of the Guitar Heroes. I'd be surprised if it wasn't the best selling. Well, I got the list right here. Might as well look up how it stacks up here. Guitar Hero 1 sold 1.53 million copies. Guitar Hero 2 sold 3.41, and 3 sold 3.23. So technically on the PS2, Guitar Hero 2 sold more copies. However, Guitar Hero 3 was on a lot more than just the PS2. Guitar Hero 3 was on the Xbox 360, which I think Guitar Hero 2 was technically on the Xbox 360 as well. But Guitar Hero 3 was on the Xbox 360. It was also on the Wii. It was on the PS3. It was on like everything. And so it definitely sold more copies overall than Guitar Hero 2. But yeah, awesome game. It actually had Slash in it, and that was how I found out who Slash was. And now I'm a gigantic Guns N' Roses fan, but yeah, I actually learned that Slash was and Tom Morello as well. I learned that they were like real guitarists that were in real games. That I did not know that at the time. I thought they were just Guitar Hero characters. And then the at the end you had a guitar battle with the devil with the devil went down to Georgia, which was absurd. And then you played really bad rendition of probably unless you were just a god of Through the Fire and the Flames by Dragon Force at the credits. So there's just like it just had more character, I feel, than Guitar Hero 2. It actually was not made by Harmonix. It was the first Neversoft developed Guitar Hero 3 game. So it's a little bit disrespectful for me to put it above Guitar Hero 2, but I gotta be honest, I do like Guitar Hero 3 more. I like the set list more. It's definitely worse graphically than Guitar Hero 2, which I remember thinking was weird at the time. But it had where it counted. Like the song selection was better. It actually had like kind of a story, even though not much of one, but it just had more character to it. The characters themselves were a lot more emotive and memorable, I felt, than what you had in Guitar Hero 2. The fact that it actually brought in real guitarists was, I thought, very cool. And this is like after this, it all kind of went downhill, where they were releasing way too many Guitar Hero games, and the market got oversaturated, especially when you combine in Rock Band. But Guitar Hero 3, the zenith of popularity, and I think quality of the Guitar Hero series. Number 11 is a game that I'm kind of surprised and a little bit disappointed didn't make the cut for my lineup for the masses list. But number 11, I have Sly 2, Band of Thieves. And Sly Cooper was definitely not as popular as Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter. The first game in the series was the best selling, and it only sold 1 million units. That's the series is made by Sucker Punch, who make now much more famous for the Ghost of Tsushima series, and they made Infamous for that. That was also very popular as well. But Sly Cooper is kind of where they really kind of their first like hit in the sense that it hit a pretty decent audience, but it was a series. But definitely nowhere near as famous as Jak and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank. However, I really think that so I've only played the first two Sly games, and I do think that Jak and Daxter and Ratchet are definitely better than Sly One. I think Sly One is pretty basic, and there's not a whole lot to that game, and I didn't really like some of the like they tried to change up the gameplay throughout the Sly Cooper series, but I didn't think they did a very good job of it in Sly 1. And frankly, they had a mixed record on Sly 2 as well. Like some of the times they try to mix up the gameplay. It's like, not super great. But in terms of just the core gameplay, I thought Sly 2 was like really awesome. This was really cool where it was kind of open world in a way. Like you went to these hubs and the hubs were completely open. And then like you would it was kind of like open world activities in the hubs. Like you were basically each time you're getting ready for like a big heist of some kind. And so, which was also like very similar to what Grand Theft Auto later adopted for Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 with the way that they do their heists. Like you would like scope out where you're going to go and you do some reconnaissance and you do missions kind of getting ready for the big heist. And then it would culminate with a big heist. And they were always awesome and super, memorable and like kind of high octane moments. And Sly 2 did that way before Grand Theft Auto, and it was extremely fun and like extremely polished gameplay. Sly like controlled like a dream, and he was like extremely nimble and fast with his animation was awesome. These games were cell shaded and they looked really nice. Sly Cooper himself I thought was really well written. He was a really strong character. I think he's a much better character than either Ratchet or Jak. Um, and I think it had better storytelling in a lot of ways in those games as well. I really like Sly 2. I never ended up getting around to Sly 3, but I should. And that's a game that I think I will play at some point just to round out that series. And I ought to play the one that Senzaro Games made after Sucker Punch had moved on. That was like a PS3 game. But yeah, at the time, Sly 2, I just remember I definitely played it after Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter. My first exposure to it was on a demo disc. And that was what kind of, or I think it was a demo that they had included on a different game I had. I think because like that was a thing back in the day. You would buy, like for instance, I remember on the PS1, you'd buy a Crash Bandicoot game and you would get a demo if you like put in the right button combination for a Spyro game or vice versa. And I think it was one of those games where it might have been a Ratchet and Clank game where I got a demo for Sly 2. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I really liked it a lot. And then finally, I bought Sly 2 and loved it. Ended up having a great time with it. I didn't finish it on the PS2. It was on the PS3 when I finally finished it on the HD collection. But yeah, really awesome game. And I wish it had sold more copies. I think anybody that would go back and play through these series today, I think Sly 2 would hold up a lot better than um, certainly the early Ratchet and Clank games. And I would say the later Jak and Daxter games. I don't think Sly 2 beats the peaks of either series, as we're going to see later on. But yeah, really awesome game. Number 10, I have SmackDown versus Raw 2007. I mentioned earlier on the list for the masses that 2006 was by far the most popular. And it was the first one I played in the SmackDown versus Raw series. But SmackDown versus Raw 2007 is the one that I enjoyed the most. I liked the controls better. I liked the roster better. I liked the story mode better. I liked the general manager mode better. It was just better in every way, basically. More polished, had way more famous and important legends on that game. It was more impressive graphically. I think this is the best wrestling game ever made. It was just so unbelievably addictive. I spent so much time playing it. I spent a lot of time playing the story mode, but it was mostly general manager mode. It was all about that general manager mode. I was a big wrestling fan at the time, so I was definitely the perfect audience for it. But I just love SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. I think it is an amazing game, even still to this day. I think kind of similar to 2006, you could go back and still have a great time, but 2007 in particular, because it just controls super well. There was all this interactivity they added with the environments that was not present in 2006. That was extremely fun, and it made matches feel a lot more varied and just interactable. Like it just felt like you had a lot more tools at your disposal, a lot more different things that you could do in the matches themselves. So yeah, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, amazing game. If you're ever gonna play a wrestling game, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 is the one that I think you should pick. Number 9 is Star Wars Battlefront 2. So this is a game that I already had on the list for the masses. Obviously, an extremely popular game. I mentioned I spent a ton of time playing it. It's an amazing game. And then number 8, I actually have Star Wars Battlefront 1. So I would include both. I loved both games. They were both games that I spent probably hundreds of hours realistically on the PlayStation 2. And it was a pretty even amount of time, even split between the two. I feel like I played both of them, and there were different things that they both did better. I think mechanically, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was tighter. It allowed you to play as the Jedi, which was really fun, and it had space battles, which was cool, but they were pretty repetitive. Star Wars Battlefront 1, though, I think it had better map design. I think it had. I would say I think I liked the classes better overall in Star Wars Battlefront 1 than 2. And then the maps were way better. And then also like it had some maps where you could have in atmosphere dogfights, like you would have like fighters going around at the same time that people were on the ground going around like on foot. And then you'd also have like kind of like tanks and things and walkers and things of that nature. And like you went into a to one of the maps that had all three of those at the same time, like the Tatooine Dune Sea or the Naboo Fields, whatever that place was called. Um, it was awesome, and the Bespin platforms didn't have like the walkers and tanks, but they just had like this gigantic atmosphere battle with the fighters up there, and then you have like this ground battle on the platforms, and it was also all taking place on top of Bespin, which is a gas plant, so you could like fall to your death and you could like get blown off the sides and stuff. It was just an amazing map designs. And I thought that it was all both of those games. It was a conquest, kind of like they kind of like aped off of Battlefield, the Battlefield conquest mode where you're capturing command posts. But I'd never played Battlefield at that time, and so it was totally novel to me. And then obviously I was a huge Star Wars fan, and so I just absolutely loved it. Star Wars Battlefront 1 had its own version of the Galactic Conquest mode. It wasn't quite as deep as Galactic Conquest in 2, but it did allow you to blow up planets as the Empire, which you could not do in Star Wars Battlefront 2. So that alone was like super cool and it felt extremely powerful to do that. And yeah, I just love both games for different reasons. I think they're near equals in terms of quality, but if I had to give one the edge, like if I had to pick one, I would pick Star Wars Battlefront. But I don't have to pick one for this list because it's my personal list, so I'd pick both of them. Number 8 and 9 on my list. Number 7. This is another crazy pick. This is probably my deepest cut pick, and not one that maybe you would expect me to pick. It's kind of in contrast with everything that we've had so far. Number 7 is Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelists of the Roses. And I am so happy that I'm getting the opportunity right now to talk about this game to like the two of you that are probably listening to this podcast. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelists of the Roses is an awesome game. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duels of the Roses is not a traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Game where, it's like it is you do battle with cards. It is a card collector, it is a deck builder, like you would expect from a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. However, it's not traditional Yu-Gi-Oh mechanics at all. It is basically what it is a turn-based tactical RPG. Uh, like what you would find with like a Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics or something like that. Except for it's played with cards. You're on like this grid and you move your cards across, like one at a time across this grid and your goal is to knock down the life points of your opponent. Each player starts with 4,000 life points, but you can like each player has like a kind of like a king if you want to think of it in like chess terms, and you can like get to the king and attack him directly, and you just like absolutely obliterate your opponent that way. But had all the deck building of a traditional Yu-Gi-Oh game, but with way deeper strategy than you would get from like a traditional Yu-Gi-Oh game. Like I had this Yu-Gi-Oh game on my Game Boy Advance that I played a lot too and I really enjoyed, but nowhere near as deep or strategic or satisfying as Duelist of the Roses. And Duelist of the Roses was also really hard. Like every opponent that you went up against, the deck was totally stacked against you. Like all of the different maps had different environmental like layouts, and they were all designed to benefit your opponents. But you got enough tools to where you could like kind of set up your own environment in like certain pockets of the map, and like where you would be like your cards would be stronger. And then like there were these ways that you could combine cards to like create more powerful ones, and you had to like learn all those combinations. It was never laid out to you. At the time, you just had to figure it out. Now you can kind of look them up online, but it's still super complicated. I was not a game that I was able to complete as a kid, even though I played a lot of it because it was just too hard for me. But I have since gone back as an adult and played it and have beaten the game multiple times, and it is always unbelievably fun. If I could have any game brought to modern consoles, I don't know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels of the Roses would be number one, but it would be certainly in the top 10, maybe in the top 5. I would love to be able to play this on modern consoles and not actually have to dig out my dust off my PS2 whenever I want to play it. But it is an extremely fun game, and it I actually credit this game with getting me into turn-based strategy RPGs, which now I've played some of the Fire Emblem games and I really love them. They're obviously better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels of the Roses, and I'm getting ready to. I'm super excited about Final Fantasy Tactics coming out on the PS5, which was just announced last week, and I actually own. Looking over here, I own the physical copy of Tactics Ogre Reborn. I recently just bought this earlier this year. And so I've loaded it on my PlayStation 5. I'm planning on starting it hopefully this week, maybe this weekend or whenever I get some time. But I am planning on playing that. I want to play through that game before Final Fantasy Tactics, just because I expect Final Fantasy Tactics to be better. It came out after Tactics Ogre on the PS1, and Final Fantasy Tactics. I mean, gosh, I just in terms of just like it, like I actually have a list of like 2,000 plus games of like games that I want to play. I realistically kind of don't expect to actually get through all of them before I die. But I have them like in order just because I want to, or like a rough order, because it's just like these are the games that I want to experience, you know. And on that list, Final Fantasy Tactics is number one. So I'm just unbelievably excited for that game to be coming out. I know I've kind of got on a tangent here because we went from Duels of the Roses to this, but anyway, point is the Duels of the Roses was the first game I played that was like that, and I didn't realize it at the time that it was like a turn-based strategy RPG. But now I recognize that that is exactly what it is, and it is so unbelievably fun. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, or if you have any nostalgia for that, or if you just like turn-based strategy RPGs or deck builders or any combination of the two, I really think that you should check this game out because I think it is really, really strong. It definitely transcends the Yu-Gi-Oh license. It really doesn't have anything to do with that. There's a loose story that also has nothing to do with the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise other than the character models. It's actually more of a retelling of the War of the Roses, which was like this actual historical war that happened in like Europe or something. I don't know. We didn't really learn a whole lot about that in U.S. history classes growing up, but I know it's something that actually happened. And it has like actual like landmarks. It has like Stonehenge in it. Like it's just a really weird, off the wall game, perfectly emblematic of the kind of games that were being made in the PlayStation 2 era, and I love it dearly. I think it is a legitimately great game. That's my number seven. Number six is Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. This is the third Ratchet and Clank game. I think it is by far the best Ratchet and Clank game, at least of the original trilogy. I haven't actually played any of the Ratchet and Clank games after Size Matters, which was the PSP Ratchet and Clank game. And I never actually finished that one, but that's the newest Ratchet and Clank game that I have played. So I haven't played any of the PS3 ones. I haven't played any of the PS. Well, I guess they just did the remake of the first one on the PS4, and then obviously they did Rift Apart on the PS5. I haven't played any of that. But I have played Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal, and at the time it was an amazing game. It was like so funny. The level design was so unbelievably good. It had all of the great stuff that was in the original two games, but it refined the mechanics significantly. It made the arsenal way more fun to level up and everything. It actually told like a pretty decent story, I thought. On top of all that, it actually had this multiplayer mode, which you were kind of supposed to play online, but obviously I couldn't do that. But my brother and I would play the online mode just us and like a split screen, and it was still super fun. It was so clever and unique as an online mode, and that would have been an amazing thing for if they ever bring Ratchet and Clank 3 to modern consoles for them to actually include in the game. I don't think that would actually happen, but man, it would be super cool if they did. But even without that, just the base game I think is so slick, so funny, so well made, so mechanically tight, and there's just not a dull moment playing Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal. I have absolutely no complaints whatsoever with that game. I think it's awesome, and so it's number six on this list. Number five is Jak and Daxter One. I already talked about earlier about why I think that game is so absolutely brilliant. It is one of my favorite. Both of these are among my favorite platformers ever made. Jak and Daxter more of a pure platformer. I just think back to having my mind blown by it whenever I saw it for the first time all those years ago, and I still love playing it to this day. Earlier this year, I think, or maybe it was late last year, whenever they put it on the PlayStation 4 and PS5 here recently. I think it was earlier this year. Um, I streamed myself playing it. I've actually streamed myself playing it on the Wildfire Gaming channel twice. The second time with much better audio, but yeah, I streamed it earlier this year and getting the platinum trophy, and I'm one of the fastest platinum trophy achievers in the game. It's a game I know like the back of my hand, probably better than the back of my hand realistically, and I absolutely love it. So of course it would be on my list. It's number five. Number four though, I have The Sims Bustin Out. This was a game that I spent well, maybe not hundreds, but certainly dozens of hours on my PlayStation 2, both by myself and in multiplayer. It is an awesome game. This was kind of it kind of used the original Sims as a baseline, and you could get the original Sims on consoles as well. And I did have the original Sims as well, but I played the Sims Bustin' Out first, and well, technically I played theirs first. Then I went into the Sims Bustin' Out, and it was a lot more in that traditional like suburban setting for the multiplayer mode anyway, where you would like build your house and just build up your sim and go to work and advance through your career path. In the main game though, single player game, you did create a character and you did kind of it was all about going through your career path, but you actually moved around a decent amount. That's why it's called busting out. You're busting out of the house, and you would like every two promotions you would like go to a different house and it would vary depending. There were actually a lot more places to live than you could do on a single playthrough, and so like you actually it was based on your career path to determine where you went. And like the deeper you got, the more zany the places you lived in got. Like it started off and you were just kind of living in this trailer house in the desert, or you were living in this other house with this girl, and the depending on at the beginning, it's kind of more traditional settings. But then like you get to the point where you're living in like a science lab, or you're living in like a art uh museum, or you're living in a haunted mansion with a freaking that's like haunted by ghosts, and it has a freaking organ. And it was awesome. And like your roommates are like uh vampires. Stuff. Like it got really zany. And like your overall goal was to like basically get far enough in your career where you could like fire this ridiculous CEO guy. I think his name was Malcolm Landgrab. Now I think about it, it was hilarious, and he was like your mom's ex or something. God, there was just so much like funny stuff in that game. You had like a lot of variety in your goals, and outside of like advancing in your career, there was like if you lived in an art exhibit, you had to like put on a good art show, um and like the science, or if you lived in like the haunted mansion, you had to like get exorcise the ghosts that lived there and stuff like that. It was just so clever, extremely fun game, extremely addictive, extremely replayable. And then like you would unlock all this stuff in the main game, and then you could take it into the free play mode, which is where you would do multiplayer. And I had a lot of friends that were interested in the multiplayer, and I played a lot of the Sims Busting Out with friends back in the day, and it was just such an awesome multiplayer game on top of being an extremely strong and satisfying single player game. I think it was just absolutely brilliant. I love The Sims Busting Out. It's my number four favorite game on the PS2. Number three is another game that I think really I would like to see on the PlayStation 2 classic lineup, even for the masses, but it just wasn't popular enough, I think, to justify its placement on that list. But number three is Shadow of the Colossus. This is obviously a masterpiece of a game. For anybody that's played it, you probably know that. The main thrust of it is you have to like defeat these 16 colossi, and you're just like this little guy with a sword, and it's just like extremely daunting, and you have to climb up them, and it's like kind of like a mix of action and puzzle, and it's really just kind of unlike any other game that's ever existed honestly. And the fact that it existed on the PlayStation 2 was like one of the most graphically impressive things that I had ever seen at the time. And it also was just like it had such a classiness about it. Like it is like the soundtrack was so unbelievable by Ko Tony, and it just had this atmosphere to it that was unlike anything I'd ever seen at the time, and it's still, I think, extremely affecting to people that play it even now. And obviously, the Sony has done an amazing job of making sure that people can play it. Made a PlayStation 3 version of it in the PS3 era, and then of course they made a PlayStation 4 version of it that you can play on modern PlayStation 4 or 5 today. But I think it's a masterpiece of a game. I think it's one of the greatest games ever made, and certainly one of the best games on the PlayStation 2. And for those of you who haven't played it, I don't want to say too much more, just in case, guys. I don't want to spoil the direction that it goes, but it's just a brilliant game. It's a game that everybody should play, I think. So, no brainer for me in terms of one of my favorite PlayStation 2 games. And then my top two are it's very simple. Number one is Kingdom Hearts. Number two is Kingdom Hearts 2. So, I am like I already talked about how much I love this franchise earlier. I am one of those people. Seems like a minority that likes Kingdom Hearts 1 more than 2. But then again, Kingdom Hearts 1 sold 1+ million copies more than Kingdom Hearts 2. So maybe it's not as rare of an opinion as you think. But yeah, I love this series. Obviously, I'm a huge Square fan. They're my favorite studio. Final Fantasy is my favorite series. Kingdom Hearts is probably not my number two favorite series because I really haven't liked or really enjoyed a ton of any of the other Kingdom Hearts games after the first two. I never have played three. I definitely that's very high on my list of games that I need to play for sure. But I want to go through the rest of the series before I do that because I've been told that that's kind of necessary. And unfortunately, I don't really like the spin-offs as much as the main series. But yeah, those two games are absolutely brilliant. I spent so much time playing them back in the day. They were easily among the best games I had ever played back then, and I still think they are among the best games I've ever played even now, especially Kingdom Hearts 1. They're just absolutely like obviously I would include Kingdom Hearts 1 on the one for the masses. You could not have a PlayStation 2 classic without Kingdom Hearts. I feel that very strongly. But for my own personal taste, I would have both of them because I think they're both awesome games, and I'd want them both on a PlayStation 2 classic if it was made for me. So you have it. Those are my picks, my top 20, sort of 23, but definitely, my top 20, my lineup for the PS2. So really interesting episode here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can write into the show. You can like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. But really fun. PlayStation 2 is a console that I spent a lot of time with, and was really huge for me, just kind of forming my habits and who I am, my identity as a fan of video games, I would say. So many great games on that console. That is the reason that it is the best-selling video game console of all time. I know a lot of people like kind of try to retcon that, and they're like, well, it's really successful because it was a DVD player, and that was really cool at the time. And it was. I mean, it was awesome that it could play DVDs at the time, and I did watch a lot of DVDs on my PlayStation 2, but the real reason I think that it's the best-selling video game console of all time is because it just has a pretty unparalleled lineup, I would say. Like, realistically, I think that modern consoles, through backwards compatibility and ports and remakes and remasters, have overall better catalogs. But at the time, like, we'd never seen a console with a catalog like the PlayStation 1. And then when the PlayStation 2 came out, it could play everything that was on the PlayStation 1, and then it had just as insane lineup, maybe even better lineup on the PlayStation 2. And so it was just an unbelievable console at the time. It was truly something where if you were there, you understand how legendary the PlayStation 2 was, and why it is such a core part of so many of our childhoods. And so I hope you enjoyed kind of this walk through down memory lane and discussion of some of my favorite games that were on the PlayStation 2. And if we ever do have a PlayStation 2 classic, which I don't think we will, but if we do, it'll be interesting to see how close it hews to either of these lists that I've laid out today. So thanks again for listening to the show. I will be back next week, hopefully for the start of our Andor miniseries with Reagan. So that ought to be fun. But for now and until next time, keep it warm.